my dear friends. I apologize for the delay in getting started with today's live broadcast. I will greatly appreciate if those of you who are signed in on the Azamra Online Bet Midrash chat application, if you will let me know if you can hear my voice and see the on your screen right now a image of Hebrew text of Daniel, beginning of chapter 11, with our beautiful Sefer Torah finger pointer over the text. And just as soon as I do get a message from those of you who are signed in that you can see this, I will begin today's discussion of Daniel. So just waiting now for an indication from those of you. I'm getting a message from Jake that you can hear me. Do you see on your screen the Hebrew text of Daniel with the pointer moving over it? There it is, says Jake. Good. Well, if we have that, then let us, with the help of God, proceed. Shalom. Today, the 19th day of the month of Elul of this year, 5776, corresponding to the 22nd of September of the year 2016. And we come today to go in more depth into chapter 11 of the book of Daniel. And chapter both in their own ways present exceptional difficulties. The prophecies in chapter 11 all the way up to the end cover in great detail, according to our commentators, what actually did happen as prophesied by Daniel in these visions during the period of the Second Temple until its destruction, and Daniel, particularly at the end of chapter 11 and in chapter 12, is talking about the final redemption. And the difficulties of chapter 11 are that it's extremely difficult to understand what is going on in all the wars between the kings of the north and the south, and they seem to recount in extraordinary detail what really is going on here in this encapsulated history of, shall we say, the Mediterranean and the Middle East, stretching all the way into eastern Iran and further east, in other words, across the entire span of what was considered to be the civilized world in the times of following the rise of the Persian Empire, which in turn was conquered by Alexander the Great, and Greek culture spread across from the Mediterranean area all the way to Persia, which was conquered by the Greeks, and Greek culture was spread in the east and the south, in Egypt and North Africa, in the north, Macedonia, Turkey, and of course to the west. And as we will be looking at these chapters, let's bear in mind that we cannot make a simple parallel between the wars between the North and the South in the modern age, although to some extent we can. What we see in the history of the Second Temple period is the successive conquest of the world by people that were colonialists who were spreading their culture. That was the intention of Alexander as he conquered Egypt and spread Greek culture and thought and government into Egypt. And Egypt was from the children of Ham, the third son of Noah, of whom it was prophesied that Ham would be a servant of servants, who would be completely subordinate to his two brothers, Shem and Japhet. And the interesting thing is that both Persia and Greece are Japhet, and so are Rome, which took over from Greece in the ultimate Malchut. And there is this joining between the children of Japhet, who become subordinate to the children of Shem, as prophesied by Noah, that Japhet would sit in the tent of Shem. In other words, the monotheism of Shem would eventually spread to Japhet. And this is something that is under the surface of the very complex history that we shall be looking at in chapter 11 of the Second Temple period. And of course, history goes in cycles. And while our rabbinical commentators that we shall be looking at, particularly Rashi, and his predecessor Rabbi Saadia Gaon, and the much later Rabbi Meir Leibush ben Yechiel Michel, the Malbim, they are looking at these events through the eyes of the way they were recorded by subsequent historians. In other words, Daniel was prophesying on the very threshold of this period, and from then until the end of time, all the time we are watching as history unfolds, how the divine government revealed to Daniel through the angel Gabriel and through these debates in the heavenly tribunal, the struggles between Daniel and the guardian angel of Paras, Persia, and the guardian angel of Yavan, how all these are playing out through the subsequent history. Let us bear in mind that our commentators were privy to very important historical sources. These are mentioned both by Rashi and by Malbim. Foremost among our own authentic Jewish sources is, of course, the one known in Hebrew as Josephon, Josephus, Joseph ben Gurion, Joseph Flavius, who was a most important figure at the time of the Roman wars against Israel, the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. Josephus was actually a general for the Jewish armies of independence of the land of Israel at the time of the Roman wars. And he was besieged in the Lower Galilee in a site that you can see until today, and surrendered to the Roman forces and became more than an honored captive because of his tremendous wisdom and literary skill. He was actually employed by the house of Flavius. He was patronized by them, and perhaps his histories reflect some of the spin that the Flavians wanted to put upon history to justify what had been done in Israel, and perhaps to some degree Josephus wanted to justify himself, but he tells the most extraordinary story in his histories. And he was also privy to a huge folklore of earlier history. In Deuteronomy, Moses says to the Jewish people, Zechor Yemot Olam, remember the days of eternity. And it is the Torah that really records in the best way the history of the world and the history of Israel. As we see from the Tanakh is ruthless in the way it treats the kings of Judah and Israel and the sins of the people, exposing everything in order to give us the authentic inner divine history of the world. And Josephus, who was brought up as a Kohen, he was a priest in the Second Temple, was privy to the entire Torah tradition and also familiar with the writings of Greek historians, I dare say Herodotus and Thucydides. And in his historical works, Josephus gives us a history of the world. And regardless of whether there is or not a certain bias in his treatment of the Roman wars in Israel, certainly his writings are treated as very authoritative by Rashi, by Malbim, and they bring not only the historical details brought down by Josephus, but also other historical sources in elucidating what is the meaning of our chapter. Well, I would like presently to go into the Hebrew text of Daniel 11 and just discuss verse by verse in a general way what's going on. But in order to do this meaningfully, we have to approach the very complex history of the Second Temple period. As we shall be seeing reflected in our commentators, Darius of Persia, not to be confused with Darius the Mede, who overcame Babylon and who was the one in whose reign Daniel was put in the lion's den. But Darius the Mede gave the kingdom over to his son-in-law Cyrus the first of Persia, after whom came Achashverosh of Megillat Esther fame, and then came the son of Achashverosh from Esther, Darius. And it was Darius who was overcome by Alexander the Great, and this is discussed at the beginning of our chapter. Now, Alexander the Great, as we've mentioned numerous times, died young, and his kingdom was divided into 4 sections. And these 4 sections of the empire of Alexander are important to understand in order to understand the historical background of what our chapter is talking about. Alexander's empire had the province of Egypt, which is called the Kingdom of the South. Then there is the Kingdom of the North. Well, that would be the peninsula of Anatolia, and it would be what had been the Assyrian and Babylonian empires. And as we shall see in the history after the overthrow of Darius, the northern kingdom, which was the Greek kingdom, the northern kingdom of the 4 into which the Greek empire split, the northern kingdom was in this long-term struggle with the southern kingdom. So the northern kingdom is, we might call it Aram. Our sages look at it as Aram, which in earlier biblical terms is the area northeast of Israel, up into Syria, and now where precisely the wars are going on in Iraq and Syria, and the overall area of the northern kingdom discussed in our chapter 11 is the area of Anatolian Peninsula, stretching all the way in through to the Caspian Sea. So these really are the children of Japhet. Now, the southern kingdom, the kingdom of the south, called in our chapter the kingdom of the Negev, the dry south. These are Egypt, but now with a ruling class of Greek-educated people, and so there is going on here the struggle between North and South, which in later history, in the last 2,000 years, have been expressed by the colonial expansion of the northern Japhet peoples to basically conquer, colonize the South and spread Japhet's culture all over. This is reflected in the wars we shall be reading about in chapter 11. And we also have here the Eastern Kingdom. This was the part of Alexander's empire that had encompassed Persia. And then there is the Western section of Alexander's empire, consisting of Greece, which increasingly handed over the mantle of culture and influence to Rome. And so all this is the background to our chapter, and what we need to understand is that the land pathways between north and south, of course, pass through the land of Israel, and this is precisely what gives the land of Israel its mundane strategic position of importance that is literally on the crossroads, both between the Mediterranean west and the Middle East, the hinterland, but also between north, between what is today Turkey and Syria, and south Egypt, giving access to Africa, and via the southeast all the way to via Arabia and India and South Asia. And so the land of Israel is the very crossroads, and that's where this great struggle going on through history is influencing the people of Israel. It's as if the divine tapestry is unfolding in such a way that where God needs it to impinge on Israel for God's particular providence through Israel, so it does. And as our chapter proceeds, chapter 11, we shall be seeing how Israel got drawn into these wars and struggles with lots of intrigues, nothing less than all the stuff that goes on in the highest political levels in our time, where we have the people who are behind the closed doors actually govern international affairs and international trade, international politics, and warfare, defense, etc., etc. all of these cliques and elites are drawn in on one side or the other of what's going on, and drawing Israel deeper and deeper into exile. Chapter 11 takes us on a journey from the relatively good times of the Persian Empire compared to the very bad times of the supremacy of Rome, depicted at the end of the chapter with the expansion of Rome, basically, and the spread of Roman religion, which in other words, what became establishment Christianity across the world, and we should be hearing about the methods by which the Roman governing cliques did this. And let me say right now, this has nothing to do with the original teachings that may be at the heart of Christianity. What we're talking about here is the influence of the established church, which, as we see exposed quite plainly in the words of Daniel, was exploiting paganism in order to spread Roman power. And this continued throughout the history of Western colonialism. Well, now let's look at what was happening in the population of Judea in the Second Temple, because this is of great importance in order to understand these intrigues that are going on. What is quite confusing about this period is the many different names of the characters playing on the stage, the kings of Alexander's empire, particularly Antiochus, Antiochus, and several different people bore the same name, and so too with the kings of Egypt, the Ptolemies. Some of the names of the period are familiar to us, Cleopatra and Berenice and others. And we're going to encounter many of these names, and some of the names that we need to keep in mind also are the names of Aristobulus and Hyrcanus on the Judean side. These two come in because these are the last members of the house of the Hasmoneans, who are the heroes of the Hanukkah story. And the Hanukkah story took place bang in the middle of the events which are described in Daniel chapter 11. We shall see that Daniel was privy to prophecy about what would happen, and already we have had allusions in earlier chapters of Daniel, allusions to the Hashmonaim, to the Maccabeans who overcame the Greeks. And this is alluded to very much in our chapter with the eventual defeat of Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the villain of the Hanukkah story, who tried to force the Jews to adopt Hellenistic paganism. Well, now, the house of the Hashmonaim, as I've said, overcame Antiochus, and they were a family of Kohanim, who were priests serving in the temple. And in fact, it was not according to the Torah that they should rule over the people. The Kohen's place was in the temple as the spiritual leader of the people. Now, we see in the Bible that Pinchas, the priest, was a man who physically avenged those who flagrantly violated God's law of morality. The prince of the tribe of Shimon with the Midianite princess. But the Kohen was not supposed at all to be engaged in military warfare. But here, at the time of the Hanukkah miracle, when the Greeks were threatening to uproot the Torah, the Maccabees mobilized the people and fought the Greeks, overcame them, and the Maccabees did become a royal dynasty that went on for quite a few generations. And this dynasty is of great importance because of there was a great decline in the quality of the members of this dynasty until it went down through the generations of it's about 4 generations down from Matityahu, who was the founder of the house of the Hashmonaim, and whose sons, Judah the Maccabee and Jonathan the Maccabee and Shimon the Maccabee and Elazar the Maccabee, all of these were great giborim, great warriors. It was through the line of Shimon, the son of Matityahu, that there came the high priest Yohanan Hyrcanus Yanai, whom some associate with Yohanan, the high priest mentioned in the Talmud in these earlier times in the Second Temple period. And Yohanan, the high priest who was king, had a number of sons, the most important of which is Alexander Yanai, who is mentioned in the Talmud, appears several times, who was a terrible persecutor of the Parushim, the Pharisees, in the later Second Temple period, after the middle of the Second Temple period. But he was married to a woman called Alexandra, also known as Shlomtzion the Queen, who was the sister of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach, who was one of the leaders of the Perushim, one of the leaders of the Pharisees. And Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach, through his illustrious and saintly sister Shlomtzion, put a moderating influence on the tyranny of Alexander Yanai, and actually ensured the survival of the rabbinic tradition of the Perushim, the Pharisees. Well, now, Alexander had 2 sons, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, and there was an ongoing struggle between them, which is important to know in order to understand some of the verses in Daniel chapter 11, because the 2 of them were constantly intriguing against one another, each trying to bring in the prevailing powers on their side to overcome the brother. And it was actually Aristobulus whose line continued for one more generation. That was Antigonus. After him came in Herod from a different line. Herod was actually descended maternally from Shlomtzion HaMalkah, but on his father's side he was an Edomite, and that's what counted. And he had 3 generations of kings who were the last kings in the time of the Second Temple. It was in the time of Herod's grandson, Agrippus II, that the temple was actually destroyed. And this is encapsulated, possibly a rather confusing brief survey of the history of the Second Temple period. So let us just turn briefly for the rest of today's class to the text of of Daniel chapter 11, and just follow through a few verses today. We will simply, in the remaining time, follow through the verses leading to the overthrow of the Persian empire under Darius by Alexander. Here the angel is revealing to Daniel what was to happen. The remarkable thing is that history unfolded exactly as Daniel saw it. The angel is saying, Va'ani bishnas achas ledoriovesh amodi omdi lemachazik lemaozloi. I, says the angel, this is Gabriel telling us in the first year of Darius the Mede, who had just overthrown Babylon, I'm standing there as a strength and a fortress for him. This is because Darius knew that Daniel had interpreted the writing on the wall. And as we see earlier on, Darius the Mede was a great lover of Daniel and was greatly grieved when his ministers conspired to get Daniel put into the lion's den. But Darius had enough sense put into him by the angel to understand that he has to be favorable to Israel, and he was the one that gave the green light to the rebuilding of the temple. But now the angel goes on to tell Daniel what's going to be the upshot of all this. V'ato now emet agidloch, truth shall I tell you. Hinei od shloisha melochim omdim leforas. Behold, there are yet 3 kings standing for Persia. That will be, according to some accounts, Cyrus and Ahasuerus and Darius. Darius overthrown by Alexander. That's 3 kings. V'horevi'i. This would also be Darius. There is another account mentioned by Rashi that there was another Persian king in between Cyrus and Ahasuerus, whose name was Mevisho. So either way, the 4th king, that is by all accounts Darius, the 2nd Darius of Persia, Ya'ashir osher gadol mikol, he shall become enriched with great wealth more than all. But when he gets strong with his wealth, he will stir things up. That means that he was aggressively taunting the growing power of Greece. This is the children of Japhet, one against the other, because Persia is also from the children of Japhet. Yo'ir hakol at Malchus Yavan, he's stirring up everything against the kingdom of Yavan, the kingship of Greece. V'omar de Melech, there shall arise a king, Gibor, mighty, that is Alexander, Umoshalemim shall rav, he shall rule with a great rule. V'oso kiritzono, he shall do according to his will, he conquered the world. Ocha'amdoi, Tishover Malchusoi, but when he will stand up, his kingdom will be broken. V'sechotz la'arba ruchois ashomoim, it shall be divided up to the 4 directions of the heavens. These are the 4 kingdoms into which Alexander's empire broke up: the north, the south, the east, and the west. V'loi la'acharisoi, not according to his end. That is to say that Alexander did not give over an inheritance of his empire to his own progeny. And this is something very important to understand about true Torah kingship, that it's bound up with pedigree, as opposed to what happened in Greece and in Rome, where the kingship went from the most influential person around, be it Julius Caesar, be it Augustus, be it sometimes it went roughly by by descent, but most often it went according to who was powerful. So it did not go la'harisoi, to his latter end, his own seed. V'loi chemoshloi asher moshel, nor in accordance with the government that he governed. In other words, the later provinces, into the later kingdom into which his empire split, did not attain the same power that Alexander himself had wielded. Ki sinoseish malchusoi, for his kingdom shall be cast down. Vela'achirim milvad eila, it shall go to others besides these four alluded to earlier. And this, in verse 5, is where the chapter starts going into the wars between the king of the south and the king of the north, which leads to all the tribulations that come to Israel, and through the intrigues of the cliques of Judah in the Second Temple time, they eventually brought in the Romans, and the Romans got fed up with them and did what they did. So it is from here we'll follow through in our coming section the aftermath of the breakup of the Greek Empire of Alexander and the wars between the king of the Negev, the king of the south, and the king of the north. So with that, my dear friends, let's take a brief interval before we'll come to continue with today's study of the Mishnah. Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom again. And now we come to today's study of the Holy Mishnah. And we are continuing today with our studies in Tractate Maccot. Shalom. Today, the 19th day of the month of Elul of the year 5776, corresponding to the 22nd of September of the year 2016. And today we continue with our studies of Mishnah Maccot in chapter 1, beginning with the 6th Mishnah, Mishnah Vov, which continues with the subject of the Edim Zomimim, the witnesses that are treacherous, they are plotting against a person, under what conditions they are going to be killed. And our Mishnah now reflects an interesting debate between the tradition that we have received from our rabbis and sages, the sages of the Mishnah and the Talmud, as opposed to the way that the text of the Torah was interpreted by the group known as the Tzedokim, the Sadducees. The Sadducees, Tzedokim, were many of them from the priestly class in the time of the Second Temple, who did not accept some of the traditions of interpretation of the Torah text, which had been handed down through the prophets and through the whole line of tradition that we discussed in our introduction to the study of the Mishnah, following through the introduction of Maimonides' Rambam to his Mishnah Torah. And in the Torah, in the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 19, the portion that speaks about the Edim Zomimim from verses 15 onwards, in verse 17 of chapter 19 of Deuteronomy, it's talking about the two people that are engaged in a legal dispute before the court, before the priests and the judges of their times. And in verse 18, the Torah tells us that the judges shall investigate very well. If they find that the witness is a false witness, that he testified falsely against his brother, verse 19, the all-important verse here, Va'asisem loy ka'asher zomam la'asois la'ochiv. You shall do to him according as he plotted to do to his brother. Now the question is, let us say that a false witness had testified against somebody who was guilty of a capital crime. He was seen flagrantly breaking the Shabbat, or he was seen flagrantly committing one of the most serious incest offenses, whose penalty is stoning. If he was proven to be a false witness, and that he'd wanted to have the other person executed, he is only executed, according to the rabbinical teaching, if the intended victim has been convicted of the offense but not yet executed. According to our sages, according to our tradition, the interpretation of Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19, you shall do to him as he plotted to do to his brother. Now, we shall see in our Mishnah how our sages interpreted this verse exactly, as opposed to how the Sadducees interpreted it. Maccot chapter 1, Mishnah 6, Edim Zomimim Nerogin. The Edim Zomimim, the treacherous witnesses, are not themselves executed ad sheyigomer adin, until the court case has been completed. In other words, only when the intended victim has been judged by the court to be guilty on the basis of their evidence, only if they were exposed after that would they be executed, and not before. If they were exposed before the sentence was given, they would not be executed, because no legal sentence had been passed. So this is the opinion of our sages. So now the Mishnah goes into this dispute with the Sadducees, the Tzedokim. Sheharei atzedokim omrim. The Sadducees say, ad sheyehoreg, only when the intended victim has been executed shall the false witnesses, when they are exposed, be executed. Shene'emar, be executed. Now, the verse as we have it quoted here in our Mishnah is not exactly the verse that is being quoted. The verse nefesh tachas nefesh appears elsewhere in the Torah in Exodus, but the verse that is really being explained here, brought here as evidence, is verse 21. Which says, "Don't let your eye have pity on the false witness," and there it says, "Nefesh be nefesh," soul for a soul, ayin be ayin, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot. So that is why the Sadducees interpret this verse. But our sages interpreted differently. The Mishnah here says, let us go on, Omru lohem chachomim, the sages of our Talmudic tradition said to those Sadducees, V'haloi chvor ne'emar, surely it is already said in the previous verse in Deuteronomy chapter 19, V'asisem loi ka'asher zomam la'asois, you shall do to him, to the false witness, as he plotted to do to his brother. V'harei ochiv kayom, that means that according to the verse, the brother, the other person, the intended victim, is still alive. In other words, our sages deduced from this verse that the treacherous witness was plotting to do something against a person who is still alive, even though the verdict has been passed against him, but he's still his brother, he's still alive. Harei ochiv kayom. Ve'im kein lo moneh ma nefesh tachas nefesh. If so, why does the Torah go on to say nefesh benefesh, a soul for a soul? And now the rabbinic tradition gives their answer to the verse cited by the Sadducees. Yochol mishor shekiblu eduson yehoregu. Could it be that we would interpret this verse that from the moment that they received their testimony, that the court heard the testimony of the false witnesses, they shall already be executed, even if no guilty verdict has been passed on the intended victim, but they have already given their false evidence? Would from that point on they be liable to execution? Talmud loymar, no. Talmud, the learning that comes out of the verse of the Torah, comes to say to you, nefesh tachas nefesh. Only a soul is only taken from the treacherous witness in place of the soul of the man who has been condemned to death, even though he's not yet been executed. Behold, out of this we deduce they are not executed until the completion of the court case. Only when the intended victim has been condemned to death can the false witness be executed for what they wanted to do to him. But if he had already been executed, the Sadducees said even then, if the false witness was exposed, he too would be executed. But our sages said no, only if he had been condemned but not yet executed, and then their false testimony was exposed, only then would they be executed. Well, now Mishnah Zion, the seventh Mishnah, goes on into the specific laws of testimony. and what counts as valid testimony in a Bet Din, where, as discussed, the Torah requires for capital cases 2 valid witnesses. Mishnah 7, Al pi shnayim edim oy shlosha edim yumas hameis. According to the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall be put to death the dead individual, the executed man. He can only be executed on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So the Mishnah expresses the obvious question: if the edus, the testimony, is established, it's valid when there are 2, and that is a principle of Torah jurisprudence that is simply the law of the Torah, that where there are 2 valid witnesses, 2 kosher witnesses who are not disqualified through transgressions or anything else, they determine the case. If the Torah says 2 is enough, lomo porat akosa bishloisha, why did the written verse also specify the presence of a 3rd witness if 2 are enough? It's true 3 is more credible than 2, but why do we need to tell this? Elo lahakish shloisha lishnayim. It comes to bang together 3 with 2, to compare 3 against 2, to tell you that there's something that if there was a team of 3 witnesses, they would have in common if there was a team of only 2. Ma shloisha mazimines ashnayim. Just like a team of 3 witnesses would have the power to determine another team of 2 witnesses to be false witnesses. They could testify that those 2 over there, they are testifying falsely because they weren't even there that day, they were with us. Just like 3 people could invalidate and discredit 2, Af hashnayim, so even 2 witnesses would be sufficient. Yozomu es hashloisha. If 2 witnesses came along and testified of a band of 3, no, you weren't there, you were with us, those 2 could nail the other 3 as false witnesses. Uminayin afilu me'or. From where in the scripture do we have support, even if it was 100, that, as we discussed in the previous Mishnah, Mishnah Hay, the 5th Mishnah, even if there were 100 witnesses, 2 alone could disqualify those 100 if the 2 were testifying that the other 100 were not there. How do we know this? Talmud leimar edim, because the same verse that we quoted above, Al pi shnayim edim oy shloisha edim, by the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, edim comes to multiply the number of people that could be involved. If a band of 2 were able to discredit even 100 edim, that is the suggestion of the word in the biblical text, edim, the witnesses, any number. Rabbi Shimon tells us, Ma shnaim einon neherogin ad sheyehi shnehem zoimemin. Just like 2 witnesses would only be executed if you establish that the 2 of them were false witnesses. It would not be enough merely to discredit one of them, to say that one of them had not been there. That would not be enough to nail either him or the other. There has to be a testimony of 2 witnesses that would in itself be sufficient to incriminate the person standing trial. Just like 2 would only be executed, 2 false witnesses, if they were both proven to be false witnesses. So 3 witnesses, if they were all testifying against the man and they were all proven to be false witnesses, they would only be executed if all 3 of them were proven to be false witnesses. In other words, we are looking here at something that we will be talking about in more detail presently. What happens if there is a group of people who all come along to testify together as one band? If that is the case, if you want to nail them as false witnesses, you have to discredit all of them, as we shall see. Even 3 would only be executed if all 3 were exposed as being treacherous witnesses, Edim Zomerman. Uminayin afilu meyo, Rabbi Shimon continues, Uminayin, from where do we learn? Afilu meyo, even if there were 100 who were all coming together as one band of witnesses, you have to discredit the lot of them all together. Talmud loymar, Edim, the verse teaches you to understand through that word in the Hebrew text, Edim, witnesses, it goes up to any number. Rabbi Akiva adds the following, Leivo hashlishi elo lahachmir olov. The third witness mentioned in our verse in Deuteronomy chapter 17, the third witness, he comes in only to add a stringency to him. To make his law the same as those 2. If there were 2 who were proven to be false witnesses, and they would try to get somebody executed, they will be executed. If there was a third with them, and he also testified, he would also be executed. We don't say, well, since 2 would be enough, leave the third guy alone. He would also get executed. If so, now Rabbi Akiva is going to make an inference from this teaching, a very beautiful inference. If the written text of the Torah punishes somebody who merely joins transgressors of a transgression, this third witness joined another 2 to, as it were, add force to their false testimony. If the Torah punished him like it punishes them, ka'ovre avero, just as the Torah punishes the actual transgressors, it also punishes the one that attaches himself to them. Alachas kamo vochamo, how much more so? Yeshalem sochol nal nitpol le'oisei mitzvah ka'oisei mitzvah. How much more will God's written law pay a reward to somebody even who merely joins those who are carrying out a commandment, somebody who joins the crowd of people celebrating the Shabbat or the festival or performing some other mitzvah, somebody who merely joins them will receive a reward just like those who actually perform the mitzvah. It's a great benefit to join other people who are performing a mitzvah. Rabbi Akiva's very beautiful teaching from the law of the penalty for the third witness, he infers from this that there's a correspondingly good aspect to this. Now we come to the 8th Mishnah, Maccot, Tractate Maccot, Mishnah Chet, Mishnah 8, Ma Shnayim. Nimtzo echad mehem korov oy posel eduson betelo. Just as if there were 2 witnesses, if there were only 2, and one of them was found out to be a relative of the other, or invalid through having committed some transgression, be it from the Torah or one of the rabbinical prohibitions that would invalidate a witness. If one of them was later discovered to be invalid or a relative, a dusan betelo, their testimony would be invalid. Af shloisha, so too if there were a band of 3 witnesses who all came together. Nimso echod mehem korov posel, if one of those 3 was found out to be a relative or invalid for testimony, a duson betelo, the whole testimony of those 3 presented together before the court would be invalidated. Enough to invalidate one of the mitzvahs if they are already joining together as a band, and we shall see presently what this means in more detail. If they are joined as a band testifying together, the disqualification of one of them disqualifies the whole testimony. Minayin afilu meo. From where do we learn even if there were 100 witnesses all coming together to testify, if one of them was found to be a relative of another or disqualified from testifying through a transgression, the whole team of 100 would be disqualified. Talmud Leimer Edim, the verse there we quoted earlier, has the repeated word Edim, the witnesses, meaning that they're all one band together. Omar Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yosef says, in which case were these words said that a whole band of witnesses will be disqualified if one of them is disqualified? But dinei nefashos, in laws of related to capital offences, where the death penalty might become involved, that is when we have this stringency that if there's even one disqualification, a whole band of witnesses, they're all disqualified. That would apply, says Rabbi Yosef, in the stringent cases of capital crimes. Aval bedinim mominus, but when it comes to the laws of financial transactions, theft, loans, default, and so on and so forth, tiskaimo edus b'sha'or, let the testimony be affirmed and established by the other witnesses. Cross off the invalid witnesses, but hear all the other witnesses. Let's have a leniency. Rabbi, that is Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, the mechaber of the Mishnah, Rabbi presents his own opinion with complete neutrality, just as he presents the other opinion. Echod dinei momonos ve'echod dinei nefashos. Rabbi says it's one of the same if it is monetary, financial cases, and one of the same if it is capital cases. It's always one disqualified, one witness, the whole band is disqualified, and that is the halacha. The emosai, and when do we say the above? Bisman shehisru bohen, when they gave a warning to them. Here we are talking about one of the indispensable provisions of the Torah law of edut, of testimony. First of all, the person who is committing the alleged crime has to have received a due warning before committing the offense. You are about to transgress the Shabbat, and the penalty for that is stoning. You are about to worship an idol, and the penalty for that is execution. If the person goes ahead and says, despite what you say, he goes ahead, then he is liable. That is called hatra'ah, warning, due warning. And there has to be due warning from the witnesses or in the presence of the witnesses. And for this warning to take hold, the witnesses have to have agreed that they are now standing, witnessing this event. Aval bisman shelo isru bohen, at a time when due warning was not given to them. What should do two brothers who saw one person that killed somebody? If two brothers happened to be standing by while this terrible murder took place, and there were other witnesses as well, it will be the fact that they're both standing there does not disqualify the whole testimony against the murderer. In other words, if they understand, those two brothers, that only one of them may testify, one of them will join the valid witnesses testifying, the other will say, well, I'm not part of that testimony, and therefore the fact that this other brother was standing there watching does not disqualify the whole testimony, and you can execute the murderer on the strength of their testimony. Well, now the next Mishnah, Mishnah Tet, the 9th Mishnah of Maccot, chapter one is going to talk about the conditions under which a group of witnesses are considered to be one group of witnesses. If there were two people, in other words, two witnesses, watching him from this window, there's two others who are watching him, what's going on out there from another window, from the second window. And there's one person who is warning the intending transgressor in the middle, where both sets of witnesses from their respective windows can see this man in the middle giving the warning and seeing the act which is about to be carried out. At a time when part of each set of two through the windows can see one another, even if only one of those two sets can see the other set, but they both see the man down there about to do the act and the man there who's going to give him the warning, and one of the two from this window can see one of the two at the other window. That is all considered one testimony, one band of witnesses. And that means that it will be enough if one of those four from the two windows turns out to be a brother or invalid, since they're all edus achas, is there still one testimony. If he was found to be invalid, that would overthrow the whole testimony. It could not be accepted in the rabbinical court. Ve'im lav, if all of these conditions are not met, hare elu shtei eduyos, there are two separate testimonies. In other words, if the man there in the middle is about to commit the act, and the man in the middle is warning him, if the two sets of witnesses from the two sets of windows cannot see one another, they are two separate sets of testimony, and if one of those at one of the windows turns out to be invalid, it would not invalidate the testimony of the guys looking out of the other window. As a consequence of this, a very interesting corollary, if it was found out that one of those two separate sets of witnesses was treacherous, that they had made it up, they weren't there, they were proven not to have been there, hu v'hein ne'erogin, he, namely the person that did the crime, and those two that were proven to be false witnesses, they're both going to be executed. The criminal will be executed on the strength of the testimony that has not been controverted. The two who were looking from the window and they were not controverted, they, on their strength, he, the criminal, would get executed. V'hein, and now the other set of witnesses who were proven to be false witnesses, they too would be executed because they were trying to nail the intended victim. V'hashnio p'tura, the second set of witnesses on whose strength the murderer was condemned, they would be exempt because they are not edim zomemin. Rabbi Yossi says, "Le'olam ein nerogin achu pi shnei edov masrin boy." Rabbi Yossi says they are never executed. Nobody's executed without a due warning that comes from two witnesses, not just one. According to Rabbi Yossi, they are never executed ad sheyu pi shnei edov, until the mouth of his two witnesses, Masrin boy, shall be warning the intended transgressor. And he derives it from the verse in Deuteronomy chapter 17, Shne'emar, as it says, Al pi shnayim edim, according to the mouth of two witnesses. Rabbi Yossi's opinion is not the accepted opinion. The accepted opinion is that it's sufficient for one person to administer the warning and for two witnesses to witness the act. Davar acher, now another word, another teaching that comes out of that same verse. Al pi shnaim edim, the Torah says, according to the mouth of two witnesses. What do we learn from this? A law of legal procedure. Sheloi sehei sanhedrin shoimas mipi aturgimon. That you shall not have the Sanhedrin hearing from the mouth of a translator. The Sanhedrin have to understand the language of the person on trial and the language of the witnesses. That is why the members of the great Sanhedrin between them had to know the 70 root languages of the world. The Sanhedrin cannot rely upon a translator to base their legal decisions. Well, now we come to the closing Mishnah of our chapter, Mishnah Yud of the first chapter of Maccot. Mishenikbar dinoi uvorach. Somebody whose case has been completed. He's been given his verdict. Uvorach, and he fled. He tried to avoid the penalty. Uvor lifnei oisoi veis din. If he now comes back to the same court, ein soisrim es dinoi, they do not overturn his verdict. Just because he fled, that does not mean that he gets off. More than that, kol mokom sheyamdu shnayim, every place where two people, two valid witnesses get up, v'yoimru, they say, me'idin onu be'ish ploini shenigmar dino bebeis dinoi, we testify against a certain individual that his verdict was finalized in front of the Bet Din, the court shel ploini of such and such a judge. Ufloini eitov, and Mr. So-and-so and Mr. So-and-so were the witnesses against that individual. Harezeh yehoreg. That individual will now be executed on the strength of the testimony of these two witnesses who are testifying that he had been condemned to death by another court and had fled. And now our Mishnah concludes with some general laws about the Sanhedrin and its ability to adjudicate in capital cases. The whole of chapter 2 of this tractate of Maccot will be dealing with laws of murder and manslaughter and the cities of refuge in cases of unwitting manslaughter. So now, as the conclusion to chapter 1 about the specific laws of Edim Zomamin, we deal with laws relating to execution by Sanhedrin. Chapter 3 of the tractate will get to the subject of its name, Maccot, the lashes for infringing Torah, prohibitions not involving the death penalty. But just now to conclude with the end of the last Mishnah of Maccot, Chapter 1, Mishnah Yud, Mishnah 10, Hari Sanhedrin noeges bo'oretz uv'chutz la'oretz. The Sanhedrin noheges, it can apply both in the land of Israel, the Holy Land, and outside of the land of Israel. That is to say that the Sanhedrin can only adjudicate in capital cases when the temple is standing. This we learn out from the verse that says about the person being brought before the priests and the judges. Only when the priests of the temple are there does the Sanhedrin have authority to execute. But the Sanhedrin, at a time when the temple was standing, had the authority to execute and impose other penalties like fines, the biblical fines, etc., both in Israel and outside the land. Their authority in temple times was not restricted to the land of Israel. So now, in the ideal world of the Mishnah tells us, Sanhedrin ha'horeges echod b'shavua nikreis chavlonis, a Sanhedrin that executed once in 7 years is already called the destructive Sanhedrin. We see here a situation unimaginable, unfortunately, in our ruthless and bloody times where murders and executions, judicial and extrajudicial, are carried out every day. here in the times when the ideal times when the temple is standing and peace reigns in the land, if there was one execution in 7 years, that would already be called the destructive Sanhedrin. It's their responsibility to spread peace and not to allow crimes. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Echad l'shivim shana. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Azariah, who took over the Nasiut, the head of the Sanhedrin after Rabban Gamliel, he says that if it was once in 70 years that they executed, that would be called the destructive Sanhedrin. Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Akiva Omerim, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, they say, Ilu ayinu b'Sanhedrin, if we had been in the Sanhedrin, because of course they were teaching in the immediate aftermath of the destruction of the Second Temple, if we had been there, lo nerag odam mi'olam, a person would never have been killed ever. Well, that sounds like contemporary liberal doctrine, that there should be no executions. Whether that is so or not, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon are saying that they would have been so stringent in the investigations into the testimony, they would always have found a way not to have the person actually executed. They might have put him in prison for life, but not have him executed. But then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon from the princely line of the heads of the Sanhedrin, the descendant of Hillel, he says, Af ein marbim sheichvei damim b'Yisrael. Those two, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, with that approach, they would multiply shedders of blood in Israel. They would cause a rash of murders and killings, because the purpose of the law is to deter prospective criminals. And if you have no deterrence, you will encourage and multiply criminality in the land. With that, we conclude the first chapter of the Mishnah of Maccot. Well, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed that conclusion of Maccot with, I think, very important teachings for all of us today about the importance of proper deterrence in a legal system. Let us take a very short interval of a couple of minutes, and then I'll be back with just a few words from Chassidut to round off today's teaching.
Hashem melech haven nashuva.
Shalom again, today on the 19th of Elul. Today being Thursday, let me just say a word about the schedule in the next few weeks, where we have the days of Rosh Hashanah coming sooner perhaps than we think, in just 10 days, a little over. On the Sunday night, the 2nd of October, will be the first evening, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, followed by 2 days of Yom Tov on Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday is Tzom Gedalia, the fast of Gedalia. So the week after next, we will, for the earlier part of the week, not be having our studies, but God willing, next week, this coming week, we will have on a full program on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday and Thursday, and I very much hope that with the help of God we shall succeed in making a lot of headway towards concluding the book of Daniel, and also a lot of headway, God willing, concluding the tractate of Maccot. And if we're left with anything to complete, that will be in the days after Rosh Hashanah. That will be on Thursday of the week after that, and just before Yom Kippur. I will be sending out to all those who are registered on the Kollel email list exact details of our schedule. Next Sunday we shall have Kollel from 4 p.m. till 5:30 Israel time, and then from 6 until 7 there'll be my weekly Shavua Tov hookup, and you're welcome to submit questions either by email or online on the Bet Midrash online messaging during the discussion. That will be Sunday at 6 p.m. Israel time and corresponding times across the world. And I look forward to having you join me. Next Sunday, as I've mentioned yesterday, we go up a level in the intensity of our getting closer to Rosh Hashanah, because next Sunday the Ashkenazic communities begin to rise for daily slichot on all of the weekdays leading up to Rosh Hashanah for the whole of next week, and on Sunday of the week afterwards, on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, climaxing in the Day of Judgment itself, Rosh Hashanah. So we should already be opening ourselves to just going with the flow of the Torah observances. It is through these ancient customs that we are able, in this age of confusing messages, this age of so much falsehood around, we're able to follow the ways of the prophets in order to gain the tremendous light and joy available at this time of the year. These coming last 10 days of Elul are days of spiritual ascent. Today is the 19th of Elul. The 24th of Elul is the beginning of the creation of the world, the 6 days of creation. Of course, the 6 days are 6 days of thousands, millions, trillions of years, but the spiritual influence of the primordial 6 days of creation, the sfirot, the divine qualities, this is available in these days, which will be beginning next week, leading up to Rosh Hashanah, the 6 days before Rosh Hashanah. And at this time of the year, Rabbi Nachman has emphasized to us that the hand of God is outstretched to all of us to proceed on our path of Teshuvah. Teshuvah, the return to God, is not a one-time event. Teshuvah is an ongoing struggle, a battle. We're in a world of battle. We had in the Torah portion we read last week, Ki tetzei lamilchoma, when you go out to war. And we're all grappling with personal issues, with physical issues, with issues of survival, of livelihood, of issues in our homes and in our work and in our surroundings, not to speak of the issues in the wider world, where we see the hand of providence now really ratcheting up the world as we come ever closer to our complete Geula. And Geula, redemption, is available to everybody at this time of the year who is willing to turn to God. God's hand is stretched out to those who will stretch out our hands in prayer to Him. This is the time to literally pour it all out. God is the judge and God is the witness, and God knows everything that happened. God knows all the thoughts in the heart, and God calls us our children. And as Rabbi Nachman emphasizes to us, we are entitled to approach God as a child approaches the parent, to set forth our complaints, our hurt and our pain, to set out our conflicting thoughts and feelings and our questions, our doubts, our need for reassurance, for strengthening. All of this can be the content of our prayers. And now, in this time of Elul, Chassidut teaches that God is like a king who goes out to the fields of his kingdom where the people are working out there in the fields of life, the fields of livelihood, the fields of worldly endeavor. And God is available. The king is available before he will go up onto his throne of judgment on Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. And then too we shall cry out with a cry that has no words, the cry of the shofar. The cry of the shofar comes straight out of the heart. But now, in the preparation for these days of wars, let us pour out the words of our hearts in appeal to God to help us to follow God's will as He teaches in the Holy Torah. With that, my dear friends, I would like to wish you Shabbat Shalom U'Vorach, a good and a blessed Shabbat, and I look forward to being with you with God's help on this coming Sunday at 4 p.m. Israel time. Shabbat Shalom U'Vorach.